and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. To mark International Day of Forests on the 21st of March, joining me on the show tonight is Adam Farhan. He is the co-founder and director of RimbaWatch, which was formerly known as the Rimba Disclosure Project. They describe themselves as Malaysia's only climate and deforestation watchdog. They aim to build an independent, timely and open inventory of data on deforestation, climate change and human rights issues in Malaysia. Farhan, thank you for joining me on the show. It's a big day for you. And I do want to ask you, maybe we can begin our conversation by first telling us a little bit about RimbaWatch and how it evolved from the initial Rimba Disclosure Project. What are the gaps that you are trying to address here, and what do you hope to achieve?
Yes, well, yeah, thank you for inviting me on to consider this, Melissa. I'm very glad to be here. RimbaWatch, well, we started out as the Rimba Disclosure Project about 2 years ago. And we were trying to fill a gap in data and in statistics on deforestation in Malaysia, particularly focusing on future deforestation. So we found that there wasn't much centralized monitoring of the earmarking of forest for deforestation across all sectors and across all approval processes. So we looked at environmental impact assessments, we looked at forests being sold online, we looked at forest reserve assessments, and we collated all this data and we kind of tried to make a centralized inventory of this. So yeah, we started out focusing purely on deforestation. And we started out just as a small infographics page, but since then we've grown. And we've grown to the point where I believe that we are Malaysia's only watchdog monitoring all of this on a national scale. And our recent name change is actually to commemorate our expansion from looking purely at deforestation to looking at new sources of emissions. So we're going to start tracking projects in high emitting sectors, for example, fossil fuel industry, iron, cement manufacturing, and yeah, basically we'll be replicating what we do for deforestation for climate, and yeah, we hope to fill a big data gap.
Can I just follow up on something you said there? So you said that looking at data not just on current patterns of deforestation, but also future earmarked forest loss or future deforestation. So are you saying that right now we only track or there's only data for how much forest we've lost?
Yes. I mean, whether you're looking at official statistics or independent data, yes, there is only data available for deforestation that's already occurred because that's the only thing that shows up on the satellite image. Future deforestation does not show up on satellite imagery, and
that feels like it's a little too late by that point because the forest cover has already been lost.
Yeah. So we're trying to take a more proactive approach, try to identify places which are going to be deforested soon, and try to connect this data to local communities and to local NGOs that can actually try to fight and campaign against this deforestation.
Excellent. And RimbaWatch has just launched its 50-odd page report on the state of the Malaysian rainforest. Can you share with us a little bit about that? What have been the most pressing concerns in coming up with this report?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, we just released that today. It took about it's been a 2-year process because this report analyzes all of our existing data. And so what we did is we looked at deforestation from 2 angles. We looked at past deforestation and we looked at future deforestation, and we benchmarked this data against official government statistics. So what we found is that between 2017 and 2021, Malaysia lost 349,000 hectares of natural forest. And this deforestation was mostly for timber plantations. So deforestation for palm oil has actually reduced. It's still there, but it has reduced. And in terms of future deforestation, like I said earlier, we've gone through all these different approval processes and different basically deforestation alerts, future deforestation alerts. And we've identified 438 alerts that we've analyzed, and we've come up with the number that we are expected to see about 2.35 million hectares of deforestation in the future. Okay, so when you add this number of projected deforestation with the number of deforestation that we've experienced since 2017, and compare that to the forest cover that Malaysia was reporting officially in 2017, So we add these things up, and we find that if all the areas I've identified for projected deforestation, assuming those areas are actually going to be cleared, our forest cover will go below 50% and it'll go down to 47.35%.
Okay, so the forest cover promise as a pledge made by the government to have at least 50%, to maintain 50% of forest cover. So you're saying right now we're above the 50%, but if we keep on this track, if all the projects that are in the process do continue, we might lose 2.3 million hectares. Okay, that's a mind-boggling figure. Let's just kind of break that down. So you're saying that in the past, in 5 years, from 2017 to 2021, we've lost about 350,000 hectares. But in the future, we're set to lose more than 6 times that, 2.3 million. Okay, so walk me through what it's being used for, and how you've determined that, you've come to this figure. You said there were markers of future deforestation or future forest use. Walk us through that.
Okay, so how we come about this data is we look at project approvals and we look at maps of those project approvals. So for example, that's for project approvals. Then we also look at forest being sold online, and then we also look at the zoning of forest reserves for non-forest usage. So for example, for environmental impact assessments, for the ones that we have been able to find the full EIA, we've taken that map and we've overlaid that onto Google Earth. So we work exclusively with Google Earth. And once you overlay that map on Google Earth, you can then trace the project outline, on the land, and you can determine how much of that project area is forest. And then you can determine how much is going to be lost if that project goes ahead. So we've done that across 438 alerts.
Can I just ask you about the use of satellite images? Is that the best indicator of forest loss, as opposed to, say, using government data on land use?
Okay, so when we're talking about future deforestation, there is no government data that we can use because the government does not there is no official forest cover data for Malaysia. There is a number, there is a percentage of total land cover, but there's no map. So, we have to use independent data. We have to use, like independent remote sensing of what a forest is. And that's, in my opinion, that's more useful because this remote sensing it's agnostic to the law. So how Malaysia defines forest is based on paper definitions, forest cover, state land forests, etc. But how satellite images would define forest is just how it appears, and through whatever remote sensing models they're using. So yeah.
So very quickly, a picture doesn't lie, essentially, is what you're saying. Photos don't lie. So when you talk about a definition of a forest, how you define a forest and how you define deforestation, can you talk me through the nuances of that? I mean, how the government defines it, how you define it, and how a picture might show it.
Yeah, okay. So how the government or how the authorities define forest cover right now, it includes both natural forests and areas which are on paper considered forests, such as forest reserves, and anything that falls within those areas. So that becomes a problem because not all forest reserves are actually forest cover. For example, we have the timber plantation programs across Malaysia. So in Peninsular Malaysia, that's referred to as the Ladang Hutan program, forest plantation program. So every hectare under that program would be considered forest, even though they are actually monoculture plantations. In Sarawak, you can have palm oil plantations and forest reserves, and so that would be counted as forest cover. And in Sabah, it's the same thing. How we define, how RimbaWatch defines forest, and how every NGO in Malaysia defines forest, and how I think the general public defines a forest is that it has to be natural forest cover. Natural meaning that it's been forest since day one, and it has not been converted to any other land usage, or if it has been converted to other land usage, it's been restored as a natural forest.
Right. So from, say, a satellite image, you can see if it's a plantation. It's man-made. Clearly, it's not natural forest cover. Talk to me a little bit about the ability to get that kind of data. It feels like so much work has gone into using satellite data, geospatial data, to make sure that, or to look at what's being lost and to predict what's, going to be, and to overlay that with what's going to be lost in the future.
Yeah. So it did take a long time. So like I said earlier, we had 438 alerts to go through, and those are the 438 alerts that we've verified. So where we are able to identify a map from the project, the company, or like the government or whatever. So beyond that, we actually have a database that has about 1,000 alerts, for which we don't have a map for each of those alerts, so we can't do anything because we can't verify anything. But yeah, I think in terms of the process, it is relatively simple in terms of just putting it onto Google Earth, and it is very helpful that we have certain data sets that we can build on. So, for example, the World Resources Institute, which runs Global Forest Watch, they use satellite imagery and like a sort of AI integrated modeling system to identify types of forest cover and to identify the loss deforestation within those types of forest cover, and then what's been planted on the land after. So if it's a plantation, even what kind of plantation it is. There's a similar model by the EU called the Tropical Moist Forest Model, which has very similar data. So we're able to use these tools to create our estimations and to create independent monitoring of Malaysia's forests.
So with all this monitoring, what are you hoping people will do with this information, with the projected 2.3 million hectares set to be lost?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, okay, so from this 2.35 million hectares that's going to be lost, 80% of that is for timber plantations. So that is ladang hutan in Peninsula Malaysia. That is licensed for
80%?
80%. Yeah. Licensed for planted forests in Sarawak and the industrial timber plantation program in Sabah. What I hope people get from this report is to pressure the authorities into once and for all getting rid of this entire program, this entire concept of putting industrial monoculture plantations in forest reserves. It makes no sense, and it's basically just greenwashing deforestation. Because like for ladang hutan in Peninsula Malaysia, the authorities often refer to these projects as reforestation projects or as forest restoration projects, and even in the EIA titles, it reflects that kind of way of thinking. But what they're actually doing is they're demolishing intact natural forest and replacing it with something that's no better than a palm oil plantation, right?
Okay.
So yeah, I hope my hope is that the public takes this information and uses it to pressure for change.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break and come back and talk a little bit about what we can do to pressure for change. We'll be right back here on Consider This. Stay tuned. Hi, thanks so much for staying with me on Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. I'm speaking to Adam Farhan. He is the co-founder and director of RimbaWatch, formerly known as Rimba Disclosure Project. RimbaWatch has just released their report on the state of the Malaysian rainforest for 2023. Just before the break, we talked a little bit about the timber plantations or forest plantations as kind of greenwashing for forest covers. Can we talk a little bit more about the governance issues that you identified with this report? What are some of the other pressing governance issues when it comes to forest management? And I understand it's different for Peninsula Malaysia and East Malaysia, correct?
Yeah. Yes. So even in Peninsula Malaysia, each state has its own forestry department, and each of those departments can interpret federal laws differently. And at the end of the day, the federal government has no power over what the state does with their forest reserves. And that's just in Peninsula Malaysia. The federal government has absolutely no power over what happens in Sabah and Sarawak. So that's kind of the issue that we're facing. Even if the federal government wants to be proactive and say, hey, you know what, we are keeping our forests, no more deforestation in Malaysia. There is no practical way for them to actually enforce, such a commitment.
It's just that a lack of legislation or
Yeah,
enforcement.
it's not just a lack of legislation. It's that constitutionally, the federal government cannot force states to
Right.
manage the forest differently, and it's also a matter of states needing or states claiming that they need income from deforestation. And so if the federal government is removing a source of income for a state, that isn't very good optics.
Can we talk a bit about the forest for sale?
Yes.
That was one of the great investigative
pieces that that RimbaWatch had put out. Walk us through why there were listings for parcels of forest reserve on sale at e-commerce websites.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, we have identified quite a few listings of forest reserve land being sold, and how we identify that it's a forest reserve is that these real estate agents they post a map of the area that's being sold, and sometimes the map it literally shows it has the word Hutan Simpan in the map, and some of the maps are even they're from the forestry department itself, so like they are they've been what's the word verified basically by the forestry department as a project or as a concession. And so what I understand it to be is because it's not legal to sell a forest reserve, as far as I know, they're selling a company that has a concession on the land. So that they're trading a company, but the company is a proxy for,
who,
the land
who
itself.
is who are making these posts? Who's selling them essentially?
Well, usually it's real estate agents, who are selling land. It's large scale agricultural land. But in one case in Pahang, an area that we're really looking into is and this is in the report. There's a very large area to the south of Taman Negara in an area called Ulu Tembeling. And that entire area is in a forest reserve. It's in the Terkai Tembeling Forest Reserve. But we found all these listings where it shows parcels of land within that forest reserve. And each parcel of land has an overlay which says that land is titled to a person. And the person I'm not going to name because, but that means somehow someone has managed to get titles for land within a forest reserve, and these are huge areas of land. The real estate agent claims that it's 60,000 hectares, which is about the size of Perlis. Yeah, it's ridiculous, and it gets even more ridiculous when I think all I can say is that the person that the land is titled to is not a regular member of society.
Okay, all right. I catch your drift. When it's been about I think more than a year since the report has come out. Has there been any follow up, any investigations that you know of from the relevant authorities?
Not quite. There have been a lot of denials. So okay, for Selangor did, to their credit, the Selangor Forestry Department actually did look into it. They looked into each and every one of the listings that I found. But the problem is that the Forestry Department only has jurisdictions over forest reserves. Okay, so in Selangor, I did not find any forest reserve land being sold. I just found forest being sold. So when Selangor did the investigation, they said, they concluded that, it's out of scope. There's no forest reserves being sold.
Right.
But for Pahang, I haven't heard anything in terms of investigations. All I know is that after that report came out, one of the employees within the communications department of the Pahang state government made a TikTok, and that TikTok was basically trying to discredit Rimba Disclosure Project as we were known then. And he basically said his main argument was that you can't believe everything you see on the internet. So if I think I take that as an official government response. So.
But so I also note that the RimbaWatch recently met with the Minister for Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, Nik Nazmi. What's been the engagement? I'm wondering because you've got a new government new minister leading the charge against climate change. How has been the engagement with civil society, with watchdogs like yourself? Has it been more than just cursory consultation, a checklist that they tick off?
Yeah, I have met Nik Nazmi a few times now. I don't believe he's just checking off a bullet point list. I believe that he is actively engaging with us and that he's taking what we are saying and thinking about it. But there's also limitations as to what he can do as a minister. For example, he was saying the other day that he can't really, like, for example, the Nangiri Dam, which is being planned and constructed in Kelantan, because the EIA has already been approved, there isn't really much leeway to, remove that approval. But what he can say is that he's not going to approve any more new hydropower projects, new large hydropower projects. So yeah, I mean, even as a minister, I believe he has very good intentions, and I believe that he wants to do the right thing, but there's very limited capacity for him to exercise his power, especially when most of the projected deforestation I've identified is actually in Sarawak and Sabah.
There's also an overlap, as you've pointed out, between tracking deforestation and also, upholding human rights in Malaysia. Can you tell me where the nexus is?
Yeah, well, we can do it in two ways. So one is on a micro scale. The Orang Asli, the indigenous peoples, and other rural communities, their lives are very linked to the land. And one thing that separates them from us is that they live with the land, with the forest, and we live off the forest. Okay, so we take all the resources, and then we leave the land barren. But they have a sustainable way of utilizing the land's resources and making sure that those resources are maintained over time. A lot of the projected deforestation I've identified overlaps with land that indigenous communities have mapped out themselves. And this is referring to Tanah Adat, indigenous customary land. It's not the same as us having a title to our house. Customary land is more than that. It's the identities, the spiritualities, that the entire community is inscribed into the land. So if you remove them from the land, you're removing a people from their nation, so to speak. It's like removing the Palestinians from Palestine. What they're going to get. So yes, on a micro scale, that's the kind of human rights issues that we're facing. But on a macro scale, we have the right to a clean environment. We have the right to breathe fresh air when we go outside. We have the right to temperature regulation, for example. The forests, the world's tropical rainforests regulate the Earth's temperatures to such an extent that they keep the Earth 0.5 degrees Celsius cooler than if there were no tropical forests. And in Malaysia, particularly, it's been found that forested areas can be up to 4.5 degrees cooler than non-forested areas. And if you cut down that forested area, that warming effect can be felt up to 8 kilometers away. So, forests are they're not empty spaces. Socially, they're not empty spaces, they're cultural spaces. And two is that when you cut down the forest, you're removing our right to the ecosystem services that those forests provide. And especially when it comes to forest reserves, which are state land, basically it's the land of the people, it's our land. When you have a logging company or a plantation company come and destroy that forest, you're taking away our forest,
Right, and I want to thank you for that, bringing that together, because then I think we understand. Sometimes it feels like an abstract topic. Rainforest feels so far away for many of us in the urban areas, but bringing that back to the importance of why we need to care about, the forest that we've lost and the forest that we are set to lose. So thank you so much for joining me on the show and for all the work that you've been doing with RimbaWatch. Thank you. That was my conversation with Adam Farhan, co-founder and director of RimbaWatch. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.